Hey guys, in this week's episode, we are joined by Matt Ward of Cinematic Considerations. Mike and Chris are both off, and in this episode, we're going to discuss Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, Dick Johnson is Dead, some other doc recommendations from 2020, and we're going to be reviewing, in preparation for Mank, we're going to be reviewing Citizen Kane. So join us. Casual Cinecast, powered by Cinelinks. My name is Justin. We do not have Mike or Chris with us today. Instead, we have guest Matt Ward of the Cinematic Considerations podcast. How you doing, Matt?
Doing good. Glad to be back filling in as always.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. Love having you as a guest. We super enjoyed your last episode on here, which was your top 10 films of all time.
Yeah, no, that was a good time. And yeah. I heard Mike Amal's top 10 list, and I really enjoyed that one as well.
Yeah, those episodes are super fun. So it's too bad we can't do another one. I wish I could do. Maybe we should do like a top 11 through 20 sometime and have everybody repeat.
Or just do all genre picks of things that aren't on your top 10 list, but like your favorite horror movie, your favorite all sorts of different things.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, especially with COVID continuing and releases getting pushed further and further back. We might actually have to do those things.
Well, I mean, there's always going to be something to watch, as someone who has seen The Holiday on Netflix can tell you.
Fair enough. Well, all right. If this is your first time listening, normally we like to start off every episode in a section called News on the March, which is actually really appropriate for this Citizen Kane review. And in that section, we talk about film, TV news, movies and TV we've been watching. And then after that, we'll move into our feature review. And this week, we'll be discussing Citizen Kane, which was your choice, Matt.
It was my choice. You and I were talking about different things that we could do. And I was telling you that I was trying to get ready to prep for David Fincher's Mank, which comes out here on Netflix here next month. It's actually in theaters if you can actually find a theater that will actually play that movie. But with COVID, it's really hard. But so I'm trying to do some prep work for Mank. And so trying to get in all of my Citizen Kane research and discussion and all that sort of stuff. And it kind of hit at the right time. So this will be good if y'all decide to do a Mank episode here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, it'll be a good companion piece. And while Citizen Kane is a highly regarded film, it is not on the Criterion Collection. So until it is, it would be hard to find a time to do a review of Citizen Kane, which is, a film worth reviewing.
Absolutely. I'm glad I could kind of nudge y'all in that direction.
Yeah. And speaking of Criterion Collection, here on the Casual Cinecast, every other week we put out a Casually Criterion episode. In these episodes, listeners choose a film from the Criterion Collection for us to review by voting in a poll that we put out on our Twitter account. So follow us on Twitter to vote in the polls and look forward to our next Criterion episode, which will be on Diabolique, the French film, which was a poll from Halloween times, and we were picking suspense thrillers, which we're a little bit past that time, but that movie is great no matter what time of year. So look out for that episode and go watch it in preparation. Have you seen Diabolique, Matt?
I have not. No, you and I had discussed possibly watching Diabolique, but it's on my list of things to do after Citizen Kane and Mank, and we're getting into Oscar time, so I might have to push it until January. But yeah, I'll be catching that one for sure.
Well, fair enough. We'll have the episode on it next week, so it'll be ready in plenty of time for January.
Sounds good.
Cool. And if you want to vote in the polls, like I said, follow us on Twitter. That is at Casual Cinecast. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at Casual Cinecast. You can email any questions or topics you want us to discuss to casualcinemedia@gmail.com or send messages to any of those social media accounts. And if you haven't done so already, you like the show, you want to help other people find it, give us a 5-star review on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you use. It'll help other people find the show and grow the audience and, make our Criterion polls more representative by having more votes.
That's true. The more voting does matter.
It does. That's a timely thing.
That's why I said it.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, with that, Matt, are you ready to move into News on the March?
Is Charles Foster Kane dead?
I don't know.
Well, we're going to find out on News on the March.
News on the March.
All right, Matt, since you're our guest, you can go first in News on the March. What have you been watching this week?
Sure. So I finally caught up on a film that I probably should have seen, 6 months ago at least now, and that's the Sundance drama Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always from Eliza Hittman. Justin, have you heard about this film?
I have, yeah. I've heard good things. I think Chris watched it a while back. I can't remember if he discussed it on the show. I don't think he did, but he had said that he liked it and he had said good things about it.
Yeah. So for those of you that haven't heard of this film, it's an independent film from director Eliza Hittman, starring a first-time actress, Sydney Flanagan, who does an absolutely incredible job. It's a small kind of intimate film about a 17-year-old girl in Pennsylvania who finds out that she is pregnant and has to go through a lot of different struggles to have an abortion. She doesn't want to have the child, so she has to struggle to figure out a way to have the abortion, pay for it herself without her family knowing about it. And she's accompanied on a journey essentially to New York to get this abortion by her cousin. It's an incredibly small and intimate film that is just so. There's not a lot said in this movie. It's a very, very quiet film. There's a lot of introspective, long pan camera shots of just Autumn looking out of a bus window and just kind of really taking in the weight of all of this film. And it may sound a little bit demure, but it is just so incredibly powerful because there's so much being said without words being spoken in this film. There are long pauses of silence that just that speak volumes. When you're in a doctor's room with Autumn, and you just see the look of like terror in her eyes as she's having to undergo these procedures and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of uncertainty to this like very small, intimate, minimalistic film. It kind of appreciates the longing for lost or stolen innocence in a lot of ways. So it's actually a strange companion piece to Citizen Kane and the losing of Charles Foster Kane's youth. But it's an absolutely brilliantly beautiful film, shot on 16 millimeter camera, just like has a really bleak perspective. Everything kind of has like a grainy sheen to it. But it's just so beautiful. It reminds me very much of the like very controlled, small way that another Sundance favorite of mine, The Assistant, that's the name of that film, The Assistant, did earlier this year, that kind of touched on the Harvey Weinstein sexual abuse scandals do as well. But this is Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is probably my new favorite film of the entire year. Yes, it's very small. Yes, it probably won't get the recognition at the Academy Awards that it very well could deserve, but I think it's going to be a top contender for Film Independent Spirit Awards, which I do vote on, and I will probably be voting in every category I can for Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always.
Oh, wow. That's strong praise. Yeah, it sounds really interesting. I don't know what the connection to this other film is, but it reminds me of a foreign film that I watched several years, probably about a decade ago. I think it came out in 2008 or 9, maybe a little earlier, but it's called 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. Have you heard of that movie?
Only because you mentioned it to me when we were talking about Never, Really, Sometimes, Always earlier.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So, I guess I knew you heard of it, but I had to ask anyways for the listener's sake. But
no, it's okay. Sorry.
It is a film that came out on the Criterion Collection pretty recently. I think this year it came out, which is a film that I guess I had seen, but I'd kind of forgotten about. But it is a very similar plot line where you have two young girls, and I can't remember the country that this film takes place in off the top of my head, but they're in a country where I believe abortion is illegal. And so I think maybe what the difference might be, you don't have to say if you don't want to spoil it, but this one, she was basically having to go through a bunch of underground means to get this abortion, as opposed to being able to go to somewhere safe and regulated. It's not like that. No. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is not necessarily about underground abortion. It's just more of
what young girls will have to do in this country to get to make this sort of healthcare choices that they need to make for themselves or want to make for themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to be as vague as possible because there's a lot of just really beautiful scenes in this movie that I'm trying not to spoil. There's a specific scene that happens about 2/3 of the way through the film that kind of where the title of the film comes from. It comes from a conversation that Autumn has with a counselor who asks her a series of questions. And that's probably the most powerful moment in the entire film. And it really, once you watch that scene, you'll kind of understand how much this of a different film this is than, say, like a film like Juno. Which kind of also deals with teenage pregnancy in a much more bright, colorful kind of way. Or even, I haven't seen it yet, but there's a new film on HBO Max called Unpregnant with Haley Lou Richardson, which is also kind of about the same thing where two girls travel across the country so that one can get an abortion. But that one like I said, I haven't seen it, but it seems a lot brighter than Never Really Sometimes always is. Because that film, Eliza Hittman's film, was a lot more haunting and just like, it makes you think a lot more than some of those other films that we talked about do.
Yeah. And not to bash the other film too much because I haven't seen either one, obviously, but the title that seems like it has more thought put into it, or the film that seems like it has more thought put into it based solely on title, is Never Rarely Sometimes Always versus Unpregnant.
Right. And but they describe the different tone. I mean, just the titles describe the difference in the tones, for sure.
Cool. Well, this is shot pretty highly up on my list because like I said, I did enjoy that 4 months, 3 weeks, 2 days film. I thought it was very, moving and heartbreaking and kind of a view into a situation that I have no experience in and
right.
will never have any experience in. And
no, for sure. Understood.
That's one of the things that, what I love about film was getting that perspective on different things. So this is high up there on my list now.
Absolutely. And you can check it out on HBO Max now. I know it was a little bit hard to find a little bit earlier in the year without having to pay a lot of money, but it's on HBO Max. So it's now hit a streaming service, which has been really helpful for me.
Fair enough. Well, cool.
Justin, what have you been up to?
Well, I didn't watch a ton this week. It's been a pretty busy week, especially with national news going on. That's been kind of all consuming my brain, so I didn't have a ton of time to squeeze in much other than Citizen Kane.
Right.
But since I had you on, I did want to talk about a film that you and I both watched through screeners from the I don't want to get the name wrong, but the Spirit Film Independent.
So Film Independent is the organization that I'm involved in, and they do send out screeners from time to time. And so I often will get guest links. So I've been trying to pass those around to the boys of Casual Cinecast and sent you a link for this new Netflix film.
So yeah, you sent me a screener guest link to a documentary film that I really enjoyed, and nobody else on the podcast had seen it, so I didn't really have a chance to talk about it yet. And since you were the guest and I knew we'd both watch it, I wanted to talk about the film now. So it was one
Absolutely.
I watched a few weeks ago, and it was called Dick Johnson is Dead. And just to give a brief synopsis about the film for those who haven't heard of it or seen it, it's a documentary by a woman whose name eludes me right now.
Kirsten Johnston.
Kirsten Johnson, that's right. I had it in my head earlier, and I was like, I don't need to look it up, but in talking about it, it just left me. But yeah, Kirsten Johnson. It's a film about her documenting and dealing with the news that her dad has dementia, or is like getting, getting the early signs and starting to develop dementia and loses memory and loses mental state, which is, you find out through the film, something that happened to her mother as well, and they had already been down that road together. And so she decided to document it and make this film that I found really fascinating and really moving in the way that it combines these sort of, I don't want to call them narrative scenes, but these sort of like surreal moments of like these I guess invented like imaginations of different scenarios where her dad gets killed, or different visions of like her dad in this weird like afterlife. and the way that she like interweaves that into the documentary and actual footage of like her talking to her dad about different things, I found it to be this really unique form of documentary that I haven't seen too much before. It reminded me a little bit of the sort of documentary type feeling of a Guy Madden film called My Winnipeg. Have you heard of that one?
I have not heard of My Winnipeg, no.
So that one is it's similar. It's like this black and white, almost like silent looking visuals about Guy Madden like growing up in his hometown of Winnipeg. It's very much blurring that like narrative right. with like fictional scenes line. But I like this film a lot because it sounds maybe like it could be really dreary, right? Like really just tough to watch and not really fun to sit through and be like super depressing. And it's actually it's pretty funny and like kind of moving, and it's bright and colorful, which I didn't expect when I found out what the film was going to be about.
Right. And
what did you think?
I was going to say a lot of that comes from the fact that Dick Johnson himself is just such a lively character, even during the moments when you can tell that he's not quite all there. And that dementia started to take a toll. Like, you can see just how much of a bright, vivacious character this guy is and how excited he is to be in every single second of the movie. Even in those moments when they kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and make it kind of more of a meta commentary on the art of documentary filmmaking itself, that they do several times throughout the course of the film, because you'll see a fictionalized scene, and then you'll go into the nonfiction element where you'll see Kirsten talking to her dad about how they're going to actually shoot this, or walking through the special effects that they're going to do. And then there's just some really poignant, quiet moments between the two throughout the film too. It's not a documentary that I was expecting, exactly like you said, especially with something that says Dick Johnson is dead. But rather than like, for it being like a memorial sort of a film, it's more of like a celebration of his life. That's really just an outstanding portrait of a man and in a relationship between a man and his daughter, for sure.
Yeah, and some of my favorite moments, and the moments that really got to me, were these scenes where she would talk to her dad, but it didn't feel like an interview setup. It almost felt like she was shooting, and then they just started having a conversation, and she would just set the camera down,
right,
like on a table next to her, and it felt really informal and personal. And I like that a lot.
I think if you like this film, you need to go ahead and check out a film that's already on the Criterion Collection. It's called Camera Person. It's Kirsten Johnson's documentary kind of like archives. So she shot footage for an incredible number of documentaries over the past 20-25 years. She's the invisible camera person behind Laura Poitras's Citizen4 film about Edward Snowden. She's done all sorts of incredible work all over the world shooting documentaries. And so she actually, in Camera Person, takes a lot of that footage and kind of contextualizes it in a very just unique and original way. And it's an actually beautiful kind of Veritas style of documentary filmmaking that I think if you like Dick Johnson is Dead, you'll really enjoy Camera Person as well. And it's a Criterion film.
Yeah, I think you recommended this one to me probably a year or two ago.
So no, I actually,
maybe it was longer.
So I actually recommended it when we did the poll after Portrait of a Lady on Fire was announced for Criterion. We did the voting poll about female directors. That's and Kirsten Johnson's Camera Person was one of the ones that I didn't end up picking because I picked The Virgin Suicides, which I actually ended up doing a review on.
Okay, that's right. Yeah. So that's been on my radar for a while, and after seeing this, it's definitely one that I want to check out. The one other thing I do want to say about the film too, one of the devices that she used that I really like is at least for me, some of these scenes that we've talked about, these like fictitious narrative sort of death scenes,
right,
are a little shocking when they happen, and can, at least early on in the film, are unexpected, and surprising, and so there is this. It creates this weird for the tone of the rest of the film, you're constantly in suspense.
Absolutely. It's very
anytime
jarring.
now, something crazy might happen that is like this violent or like horrible, surprising, loud death scene.
Because with a movie with a title like Dick Johnson is Dead, you're just waiting for it to be like, all right, there it is. Now he's dead. And like, it's real. And when they're constantly yanking you back and forth, it kind of keeps you awake and engaged in the documentary in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I really love that touch. Just something I thought was really nice and engaging.
This has been an exceptional year for documentary filmmaking, which is one of the saving graces about not having a lot of narrative films come out in 2020. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you've got films like Dick Johnson is Dead, my favorite documentary of the year, Boys State, which is on Apple TV right now, about the Boys State elections process in Texas, which is an absolutely incredible film. A film you and I both saw recently, The Way I See It, which is about an official White House photographer for both the Reagan and Obama administrations, that's now on the new Peacock streaming service, is absolutely great.
Yeah,
Amazon's
that one I watched. That one I watched last night, and I agree. It's really good and really insightful into those administrations versus more current administrations from the view of someone who was in the room constantly.
For sure. And even if you don't agree with the photographer's perspective on those things, just watching the film on mute is beautiful, because so much of the still photography that he took over both administrations is exceptional. And it's probably some of the best visual spectacle that I've seen in a film in 2020, period. And we're talking narrative or otherwise. It's just gorgeous work. That's just all still photography.
Yeah, I agree. It's very impressive. And it's awesome to use like a film, but use so many still photos and like highlight the story that just a still photo tells. I think they do a really good job of making all of that come across.
Especially when you see a still photo and they immediately go right into the video archive of that exact event. So like you see the moving picture and you're like, oh, well, that wasn't as cool as like the one image that you get from a single frame. Exactly.
Yeah. But cool. And I think you were going to name some other documentaries.
Yeah, no, real quick. I mean, like, so another film that I got to see through Film Independent that's now on Amazon Prime is a film called Time. That's an absolutely gorgeous black and white 20-year documentary about a woman's fight to get her husband out of prison for a minor felony that he was had mandatory minimums that sentenced him to like 30 years in jail, and so she was trying to get some early release for him, and that's a beautiful film. You know, this is a great year for political documentaries, as I said, The Way I See It, Boys State. There's also things like All In, The Fight for Democracy. So if you're curious more about voter suppression and all that sort of stuff, and then the work that Stacey Abrams has been doing in Georgia, she kind of helped produce that Amazon film, and that gives a lot of insight into the history of voter suppression and the work that people have been doing to make sure that every vote counts. So those are some really good documentaries as well. And then I'm sure there's more coming out here in the next couple of months as we kind of really get into the Oscar swing of things.
Yeah. I feel like documentaries, as you said, there's been a ton of them coming out, and they've really been at the forefront, which is exciting. I love a good documentary.
Yeah. And it like, as I said, it's been a saving grace to watch some of these documentaries when you're running a little bit thin on narrative content and having to go through things like Hubie Halloween or something like that.
Am I wrong, or have I heard like kind of good things about that one in comparison?
I mean, I've heard kind of good things about that one. I haven't seen it yet, but I mean, it is still an Adam Sandler Netflix movie, so I don't really know the quality there, but if it gives him the money that he can go out and make movies like Uncut Gems, I guess it's okay.
Yeah, as long as he throws out one of those every now and then, I'm happy.
Exactly right.
Cool. Well, do you have anything else for News on the March?
No, I think we're ready to finish this section of Citizen Kane-esque talk with News on the March, and then go into some actual Citizen Kane talk.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's get into it. Let's go.
Thank you. How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? This is Orson Welles. I'm speaking for the Mercury Theater and what follows is supposed to advertise our first motion picture. Citizen Kane is the title, and we hope it can correctly be called a coming attraction. It's certainly coming to this theater, and I think our Mercury actors make it an attraction. I'd like you to meet them. Speaking of attractions, well, the chorus girls are certainly an attraction, but frankly, ladies and gentlemen, we're just showing you the chorus girls for purposes of ballyhoo. It's pretty nice ballyhoo. But here's some of our real Mercury people. This is the first time you've seen most of them on the screen. Hey, give Joe a little light. Thanks. Now smile for the folks, Joe. Smile. Joseph Cotton, ladies and gentlemen. That's it. Joseph Cotton. I think you're going to see a lot of him. Here's Ruth Warwick, whom I know you love. Ruth. Look at the camera, Ruth. We caught Ruth with her hair up. And here's somebody you've all heard on the radio, so I don't have to tell you he's wonderful. Ray Collins. Dorothy Commongore is a name I'm going to repeat. Dorothy Commongore. I won't have to repeat it much longer. You'll be repeating it. And here's George Coulouris, who's a grand actor. I'll say that name again. George Coulouris. Watch it. Here comes Everett Sloane. Look out, Everett. Oops. Everett Sloane, ladies and gentlemen, he isn't necessarily a comedian. And here's one of the best in the world. Agnes Moorehead. I've said a lot of nice things, but Erskine Sanford deserves some more. Erskine Sanford. So does Paul. Paul Stewart, everybody. Citizen Kane is a modern American story about a man called Kane, Charles Foster Kane. I don't know how to tell you about him. There's so many things to say. I'll turn you over instead to the characters in the picture. As you'll see, they feel very strongly on the subject.
Charles Foster Kane is...
Sure, he started the war. But do you think if it hadn't been for Mr. Kane, the United States would have the Panama Canal?
Charles Foster Kane is nothing more or less than a communist.
Kane, governor. Listen, when the voters of this state and Mrs. Kane learn what I found out about Mr. Kane and a certain little blondie named Susan Alexander, he couldn't be elected dog catcher. I'm going to skin Mr. Charles Foster Kane alive.
I'm going to marry him next week at the White House.
Emily, I hear you've been stepping out with Charlie Kane.
Of course I love him. I gave him $60 million. Well, of course I love him. He's the richest man in America.
But all the girls say about him at first.
But you know, I can't help but admire him.
He's crazy.
He's wonderful.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what you'll think about Mr. Kane. I can't imagine. You see, I play the part myself. Well, Kane is a hero and a scoundrel, a no-account and a swell guy, a great lover, a great American citizen, and a dirty dog. It depends on who's talking about him. What's the real truth about Charles Foster Kane? I wish you'd come to this theater when Citizen Kane plays here and decide for yourself.
So as always, with our older films or our Criterion films, we will not be doing a spoiler-free section like we usually do for our newer films. So we will be jumping straight into talking about the film that may include spoilers. So this basically is your spoiler alert. If you have not seen Citizen Kane, pause this podcast, go see the film, come back and finish listening, especially because Citizen Kane does have a very spoilery ending.
And beginning and middle.
Yeah. So there will be things spoiled for you if you have not seen it yet. So go watch it.
Alrighty. So Citizen Kane is directed by Orson Welles from a script that he co-wrote with Herman J. Mankiewicz. That screenplay is now the controversial plot line to the upcoming David Fincher film Mank, which will be coming out here on Netflix pretty quick. You maybe even have just seen Mank and are coming back to listen to this review of Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane stars Orson Welles, Joseph Cotton, Dorothy Commongore, and Agnes Moorehead. The IMDb synopsis of Citizen Kane: following the death of publishing tycoon Charles Foster Kane, reporters scrambled to uncover the meaning of his final utterance, Rosebud. Justin, I know you like succinct definitions of films or synopses of movies. How did that one do?
I think it did well. I like it. It does get to the crux of the movie, right? Is just figuring out Rosebud and what is Rosebud, which is the driving point of the film, even though by the end of the film, it's not that it's pretty anticlimactic.
Right. And
in
I mean,
ways.
like, so the idea of the concept of Rosebud is literally just a device to allow Wells to go through all of these different vignettes that different people are giving perspectives on Charles Foster Kane's life. And so they each have a different perspective and are showing you a different part of the timeline from a different perspective. And so it's a very unique, especially for the early 1940s, it's a very unique way of framing up a film. So it has a very much like a radio or a stage play sort of vibe in the structure, and that it bounces all over the place. So you're going to Charles Foster Kane's death or postmortem at the very beginning of the film, hopping into the cinematic newsreels of the time, the News on the March, which is a play on March on Time, which is exactly one of those cinematic newsreels that they'd play in front of movies during the time. And that's where y'all get the News on the March intro comes from this film. So that's
right.
Nice.
Yep. A film reference on
then,
a film podcast. Imagine.
Good Lord. and then we bounce around following this reporter Thompson as he tries to interview all the remaining living people that are close to Charles Foster Kane to try to figure out what Rosebud is. But realistically, what he's actually doing is trying to figure out who this man was and trying to figure out if anybody actually could ever really tell you who Charles Foster Kane was, or if Charles Foster Kane knew himself.
Yeah, and I think that's a great explanation of the film. So do you want to go first and give us your general, what you thought about the film?
Sure, absolutely. I mean,
and maybe your history with Citizen Kane, if you've seen it before, that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's Citizen Kane, so like this is the number one AFI film of all time on both different versions of the American Film Institute's list. It's a film that, like, when you talk about like top movies of all time, everybody says Citizen Kane, even if they don't know what it's about or haven't seen it or don't know who Orson Welles is. It's just like, oh, it's Citizen Kane. And, like Rosebud is a thing that's like, I see dead people. And, it's just like it's like a catchphrase that just like, there's so much widespread pop culture knowledge of this film, even for people who've never seen this film, that like, it's very ubiquitous in that way. I'd seen Citizen Kane such a long time ago that I forgot pretty much everything about this film until I started doing prep work for Mank and started remembering things. I was like, man, I need to pop this in and start watching it again. And I've watched it a couple times here in the last 48 hours, both to prep for this podcast and to get ready for Mank. And you forget just how raw it is. This is all first-time actors, including Orson Welles, who's directing for the first time, comes right off of the huge War of the Worlds radio broadcast that scared the country to think that aliens were landing at the White House and all this sort of stuff. And movie studios were begging him to sign a deal. And a studio called RKO Films basically gave him full creative license to do whatever the hell he wanted. And so he came up with this story with his friend Herman Mankiewicz, who was a guest at William Randolph Hearst, the famous publisher. He had parties at his big luxurious mansion that's very much like the Xanadu of the film, and we can talk here in a little bit about the comparisons between Hearst and Kane. But like, this is a film that I was not fully prepared for just how eccentric yet intimate it is, with deep, meaningful themes. Like, a lot happens very quickly, and it's a very broad film, but at the same time, it's so powerful and deep in looking into the soul of a man who doesn't really ever seem to know himself, and doesn't ever leave a full and concrete ending. And there's so much that so many other movies take from Citizen Kane that nobody even really realizes. I think that's just and my thoughts initially to get started, just my overall reaction to the film, and my kind of history of it. Justin, what about you? When was the first time you saw Citizen Kane?
The first time I saw it was probably about 2007 or 8 when I first started getting into film. And as you said, before you ever even really get into film, the name Citizen Kane.
Right.
And even though you know nothing about it. So as I started to get into film, I thought, well, I need to watch Citizen Kane, obviously. And so that was the first time I watched it. And, if I'm honest, I'm not sure how much like the filmmaking technique really, I really appreciated it, in terms of like narrative and like storytelling and the sort of nonlinear aspects of it, but also just like a lot of the filmmaking techniques and how much he pioneered in this film really had its effect on me. And, I liked the story a lot, but, and I think I walked away, thinking like, yes, that film was great, but I don't know how much that was, the aura of the film affecting my opinion. Right.
Right.
And it wasn't until I went to film school and I had to watch this film several times through different film classes and watching it several more times. Getting that historical context of this film, pioneered like the deep focus technology, and look at all the things that they're able to do with this deep focus technology. And, a lot of the innovations in terms of camera movements and, shooting on miniature sets, combining with real sets and all of that stuff, which not all of that was like necessarily pioneered, but the way that it all comes together in this film, just once you're kind of aware of it and you can really appreciate it, and let like the scale of this film in the context of the time that it was made is just like astonishing to me. And that's the thing that really works for me now when I watch it is beyond the story is I'm just kind of like really putting myself in that 1940s time period and thinking about, all the films that I've seen prior to that. And like, just, I think that's where the film shines the best is like putting yourself in that mindset and just imagine seeing this film that just blows a lot of other films out of the water in terms of its scale and its ambition. And it's just super impressive to me. I think it's a good story. I think it's interesting. But to me, I'm just kind of fascinated by a lot of the technical aspects of it.
Right. Absolutely. Because Orson Welles was kind of a guy who didn't have anything to lose on this. He took a bunch of risks and knew that if it bombed, it didn't matter because he could go back to an incredibly successful radio career. But he was propped up by a studio that basically said, you're going to be great. We know you're going to be great. We believe in you. We're going to give you all the tools and the resources. And he was just allowed to create a theatrical experience that's more like live stage theater, just shot and captured onto film. It feels almost more to me like a Thornton Wilder's Our Town in a way, where you get lots of different perspectives on different characters, and it kind of has that kind of like stage presence, but there's so much scale to it that you have to visually do it in scenes like this between Xanadu and the offices. You couldn't do this as a stage play just because the sets are so demonstrably large, but it has that really theatrical, like old school live theater dialogue banterness to it, and just those little two-person scenes that are littered throughout this film just kind of have that mentality to it. But Justin, I want to throw a quick aside at you real quick. So, to continue this conversation, I know you're a big fan of the John Ford film Stagecoach. Is that right?
Yeah. I like it a lot.
So Orson Welles watched that film obsessively every single night with a playbook or a textbook that he was given about directorial standards and all this sort of stuff while he was prepping to make Citizen Kane, and that kind of basically became his visual language text for how to make films. Was obsessively watching Stagecoach every night during pre-production for Citizen Kane.
Yeah, I've heard that, and that's one of those awesome stories. I love stories like that. There's a similar one in a film that is often compared to Citizen Kane of Paul Thomas Anderson watching the Treasure of the Sierra Madre, like every night while shooting There Will Be Blood.
Right.
And it's fun to think about that. And I think there's certain things that very clearly come to mind with between Stagecoach and Citizen Kane. I mean, the one to me is like that iconic shot of John Wayne when you first see him in Stagecoach, where the camera's kind of below him, and it's that sort of like in superhero shot, you know?
Right.
And there's definitely that sort of like low angle shot looking up at Kane in this film quite a bit, where he looks like this sort of like larger than life figure.
Right, but it's not used as a superhero. It's used almost more towards the end of the film as, look at this menace, look at the way that he is domineering the people around him. I can't help but remember there's a scene late in the film with Kane and his second wife Susan, where he is shown from the bottom up. And is like a domineering force. He's standing over her, and the camera angle is her kind of cowering on the ground, with the camera pointed down directly at her. Just kind of a way to infuse just how domineering that he became later in life. It's not a superhero angle. But it's interesting to that you noted it for John Wayne as a superhero angle, because that could have been easily, this is your one shot camera angle to identify the hero. But it was Orson Welles and then the cinematographer Greg Toller who kind of changed the game when it came to how you frame different people and what the framing of individuals within scenes means, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that, you know, they brought up constantly, and why I ended up watching this several times in film school, is definitely looking at things like placement and size of the character in the frame, or are we looking up at the character to, you know, establish this character's dominance or power, right? And if we're looking down at a character, they tend to look weaker. Like that's sort of like, you know, basic narrative language that Citizen Kane helped establish. And one of the things that fascinates me, and watching it this time, I was really paying attention, almost counting along with how many times Orson Welles does this in the film, but using that deep focus cinematography where everything is in focus, there's these little like visual tricks that he does, or at least I consider them tricks. And this was, to give credit where credit's due, first pointed out to me in Roger Ebert's review of Citizen Kane. And I started paying attention to it. But because of the deep focus, there are oftentimes you'll start a scene with your characters up close to the camera, and their background will be back there and it'll be in focus. So it doesn't look like it's as far behind them as it is because of that. And then somebody, oftentimes it will be, you know, Kane himself will walk from the foreground to the background. And it's always, it's like a much longer walk than you expect. And what always happens is the background that seems kind of normal sized, whether it's windows or like the fireplace, you know, they seem like a normal sized window, or maybe a little bit bigger than a normal sized window. But as Kane walks backwards to them, you realize that like the window sill is above Kane's head once he gets close to it. Right. Yeah. Or, the scene, this may be the scene you were talking about with his second wife, when she's at the table doing puzzles and the fireplace is in the background, where when they're up close, Kane is like covering a lot of the fireplace. But whenever he walks back into the fireplace as he's talking to her, you realize that fireplace is like almost twice as tall as him and like 10 times as wide as him. And you could literally walk into, and there are basically trees as logs inside that fireplace, like small trees. That sort of thing, I think, like, to go with what we're talking about of how often he shoots him as, you know, powerful and dominating. We go from a shot where he might be, you know, powerful and dominating, looking up close and big in this sort of wide angle lens. And then he walks back and he's dwarfed by a window or a fireplace. Because while this character is powerful. As you said, he's not a superhero, right? He's pretty flawed. He's a pretty terrible person. So like to take us from like him looking powerful, but actually being dwarfed and being a rather small man.
Right.
Thematically, I find that awesome.
Well, and that leads me kind of into what you just said at the end, what I was hoping we would talk about next, which is some of the performances in this film, starting with Orson Welles himself. I mean, this is a performance from a man who is debuting as a theater actor, or excuse me, as a screen actor, while also directing himself and trying to figure out camera movement and camera placement and everything else. And he just presents himself with such confidence throughout, but yet there are so many moments where you can see his heart breaking, and then he has to like crystallize it and turn it right off again, if that makes sense. I mean, so much of this film is him domineering over other people, and then when they don't adore him or something happens, you can see there's just a hint of a moment where his heart kind of shatters even a little bit more, and then he has to like chill it back out to being as cold as ice again. I think that the moments that resonate most to me are like, there's moments within this scene where Geddes cons Mr. and Mrs. Kane to come into Susan Alexander's apartment right at the moment where he decides that he's going to stay with Susan rather than go with Emily. Like that's kind of one of those moments where you can kind of see him breaking. And then especially whenever Susan is ultimately telling him that she's going to leave him. It's basically every single moment that a woman leaves him in an ironic way, which you could talk to a lot more about the gender roles in this movie and how they kind of affect Kane as a character. But it's just an incredible, masterful acting performance from Welles. Yeah,
and I think one more scene to add on to that too, that I think is really great, is when he comes in and is it Leland, the guy who's the dramatic critic?
Yes, Jedediah Leland.
Yeah, so when he's reviewed the opera and he comes in and finds him passed out, and he's like having him like read the review or whatever, that section of it is really powerful.
That's my favorite scene in the entire movie, is everything that happens there with Leland and the Bernstein, the general manager, and Kane, both in the office where they're talking about Leland's dramatic review, and then the scene immediately after, which is probably my favorite shot of the entire film, where you see Kane working on finishing Leland's review, and then Leland coming out of the office and making his way over to Kane, and that deep focus shot that you were talking about is just incredibly gorgeous and revolutionary, and there's still nothing really like that in cinema today.
But they did it in a way, and I'm sure that it's done in other places and we don't quite realize it, but I believe that's two separate shots, right, that they've matted together,
right,
to fully achieve like both people being in focus, with Kane so close to the film or close to the lens, and the drama in that shot, like it's so over the top and so stylized, and like there's such harsh like black shadows, and Welles is so close to the lens. It's like we've gone to such more of a natural cinematography style these days, that like when you go back to this sort of thing, like that sort of shot is a bit of a punch in the face. It's not often you see that sort of thing.
No, it's definitely more theatrical in style, because it's more his coming over from theater, and the dramatic lighting that he has to take in theater to make sure that the audience's eyes are on exactly what you want it to be, because there's so much else around on the stage typically that you want to drive focus. And so it makes sense that with the lighting that he took extra care to reinforce the acting in the scene rather than the background around them. But there's so much in the background around them. That's just little things that I didn't notice the first time. All of the little set decorations and all the stuff that lead you to when you get to the end and you almost have that like Indiana Jones-esque like reveal when you're going through the Xanadu and everything's being packed up, that like literally Kane is a hoarder and he's kept every single thing from his entire life. And you can see all of those different little things littered at different moments throughout the film. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love just like that attention to detail, and even in terms of like the shot composition and the staging, in terms of being theatrical and getting the eye to look where you want to be looking at the times in the scene that you want to be looking at it.
Right.
Because there is very much, this film is very much more mise en scene instead of editing close-ups of people for the most part, right? And and that section of Kane as a kid at the cottage, whenever his parents are basically signing him over to the bank manager and
for $50,000 a year.
Yeah. So like that scene where, you know, it's really obvious when you have that shot inside the house and we pull back and we see the three of them talking at the table, and then through the window we see Kane playing in the snow. Right. That's pretty obvious. But even like that scene outside with between like Kane, the mother, and the bank owner, and the dad's in the background a bunch. And I feel like when I watch that scene, my eyes drift to every character at the exact right moment because of like some little movement or where they are placed in the frame. Just like every time I switch to a character, I feel like I'm seeing a reaction that I should be seeing at the right time. Right. Whereas like, you know, modern film, we would cut to those close-ups of those reactions to show us, but somehow Welles just has this like perfect eye for staging. Yeah,
I mean, it's the staging and it's the choreography and the timing of all of the different movements, but also the dialogue is so sharp and is delivered in such a way that feels more theatrical rather than you know, traditional films now, because there's just it's so sharp and it's so crisp in the dialogue where you get every single word, and they all have bite and they all have meaning, even when they're delivered, you know, more meekly. It's just every single word comes out so sharply in that way too.
Yeah. And in terms of other like film techniques and stuff, the one other shot that kind of blows my mind every time I see it, because I forget about it. You know, some of the things that do stick in your head, you know, there is the shot where we're going over the roof through like that neon sign and looking down in the window. And then we crossfade to like the second wife when she's older at the table being interviewed by the reporter. Like there's those shots, and the shot that you talked about where he's at the typewriter and the other guys in the background. But one I always forget about until I rewatch it is the shot of the second wife getting ready to sing the opera on stage.
Oh yeah.
Like I forget just how like epic and insane that shot is, you know. I guess I think of Citizen Kane more as this like, you know, wide angle, deep focus shots of people like brooding and talking and about newspaper stuff, you know, and I forget like moments like that just are there's, it's so chaotic and so like nutty all in like crazy all in one shot. And then to pull out and have all of that going on and then do that pan up and give us that, you know, it's not all one single shot, but through the special effects, we the camera jibs all the way up to like the stage workers on the rafters and the catwalks. I love that shot so much. It's probably my favorite.
Yeah, it's very elaborate and everybody thinks she's terrible. I didn't get she wasn't the best singer of the world, but was Susan Alexander the worst like an abysmal singer? No. I mean, she still could sing pretty good. I was like, wow, she's got a little bit of singing voice to it. I know it was dubbed over, but still, like, yeah, I booed off the stages and all that sort of stuff. I just don't see that. Like, she had some talent to it. It's not like she was terrible. I just don't know that opera might not have been the right thing for her. That's kind of what I just kept on seeing was like, hey, give her a break, man. Like, she's doing her best.
Yeah.
She doesn't sound terrible. And Kane loves it. And that's what the whole point of the stuff was.
Yeah. That's one of those weird things that, like, if she was truly a bad singer, that the sections of the film would be pretty unwatchable. Right. So you have to do this weird thing where she, even like bad music and film that's supposed to be bad has to be kind of good.
Right.
But I know what you mean. Like, you hear it and it's like, it's not terrible, but like, I guess if you're paying a bunch of money to go to an opera, like an expensive high society night out on the town, and you pay a bunch of money, maybe you want excellence. And I guess it's certainly short of that, I think.
No, I agree with that for sure. Real quickly, I think we probably need to discuss Charles Foster Kane in terms of who he reminds people of, both in days of yore and in current times. So this character is kind of based largely on, not entirely, but largely based off of the publisher William Randolph Hearst and his obsession with yellow journalism, his love for elaborate things, and his affair with Marion Davies, who is a very loose approximation of the Susan Alexander character in Citizen Kane. And Hearst kind of took this film very personally, though he never watched it himself. He had a gossip columnist basically tell him that Welles had characterized him so poorly, and so he used the power of the media to try to get Wells's film blackballed, have no one see it. He essentially called it fake news in a way, but yet somehow that film endured and overcame, even though it wasn't entirely about William Randolph Hearst. It had some Pulitzer in it. It had some other major publishers, other people that Herman J. Mankiewicz knew from his days in New York journalism. But like, there's a lot of different people that you could say are a Charles Foster Kane now. I've read articles that Rupert Murdoch was a Charles Foster Kane type. Ted Turner was a Charles Foster Kane type. Basically any major media mogul or head of an organization who likes a very elaborate things and just will never shut up can be a Charles Foster Kane in a lot of ways. And there's lessons to be learned for both the people who resemble Charles Foster Kane and for those who don't resemble Charles Foster Kane but follow him religiously.
That's very nicely tiptoed around there. I was struck by the same thing, and I texted you about that when I was watching the film last night, that it really, there are sections of the film that feel very, very current, extremely current, particularly Kane is running for government office and basically cries election fraud upon losing.
Well, right. There's it's the newspaper office at the Inquirer where Kane is the publisher, and they have the one headline that says Charles Foster Kane elected, and then a guy goes, well, I guess we can't really use this one anymore, sets that one down, pulls up the other one, and it says Charles Foster Kane defeated, fraud at polls. Yep. So there's really no way around it in November of 2020 to not see at least a little bit of Citizen Kane in modern times.
Yeah. And there are definitely parts of this film that I watched that certain political figures, I feel like they watched this film and really took away all the wrong lessons, you know, right. All those shots are superhero shots to this person of Charles Foster Kane. He's like, yeah, look how great this guy is.
Well, and what strikes me about Charles Foster Kane is that people on both sides of the political aisle adore and hate him simultaneously. So there's shots early in the film of Charles Foster Kane with Roosevelt, and then Charles Foster Kane with Mussolini and Hitler, and he's hobnobbing with everybody. And then there's a really quick crosscut scene where he's being vilified by Thatcher to Congress and basically said that this guy's a communist. And then you go out to the streets where there's a lot of working men union types, and they're like, Charles Foster Kane is a fascist, and then there's a little side rant for that. He was like, I just believe I'm an American. So it's interesting to see it in that political context. Like, Charles Foster Kane is the most political and yet also apolitical figure in cinema history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very fun. And I think, I don't know how timely the film felt, you know, when I watched it
40s?
Previously, but it's getting to be a lot more timely.
Absolutely. And it's getting to be a lot more funny too. Like, there are certain moments, sometimes because of the comparisons that you made, that are just really funny, or there's just like really quick moments that are just really funny. So like right after Charles Foster Kane loses, he goes into the Inquirer's office, and Leland stumbles out of his office, and Kane simply goes, "Hi, Jedediah," and then Jedediah responds, "I'm drunk." And I could not stop laughing at the "I'm drunk" line reading for a good 5 minutes, because it was hilarious. Like, it is a very dramatic film, but there's just some small moments in there that are just exceptionally funny.
Yeah, and I actually kind of find the opera scene pretty funny. You know, especially the coach, the vocal coach.
Yeah, he's just like screaming at her. He kind of looks like Sacha Baron Cohen in a way.
He does. The very heavy Sacha Baron Cohen vibes, and it's the ridiculousness of that mustache and like how proper he speaks.
Yes.
I love that. And I even find the shot of Kane clapping super hard. I find that to be funny. I'm not sure if that's the intention of that moment, because it is a little dark, but man, is it funny.
Kane clapping is really funny. The opera coach, like, waving his arms in the box as she's trying to sing and give her all the cues, and then like slamming his hand on the top of the box and like getting all injured is really, really funny.
Yeah. And we're stuck around the opera scene, but you know, the workers up on the catwalks, like when we pan up to him and the one just holds his finger, like closes his nose, like, she stinks. Like, that's just like the the most like cartoonish way of getting that point across. I guess we have to talk about Rosebud and the significance of that, because that is the plot line of the film according to IMDb, right?
For sure. Can I give you a quick aside about Rosebud real quick? That'll be a setup for Mank. So there is rumors, and I don't know how confirmed that this is, but I guess the scuttlebutt during the time was that Rosebud was something that Mankiewicz stole from Hearst, because Hearst used to describe Marion Davis's nether regions as Rosebud. Oh. And so that is where the title Rosebud came for the overall theme of the movie. And so, like, every time that a character goes, "Well, is Rosebud a woman?" I just kind of giggle to myself. And I was like, well, I mean, to William Randolph Hearst, Rosebud is a woman. To Charles Foster Kane, it's not. But I mean, this is some meta crap right now.
Yeah, I read an alternate story about it. Was that it was the nickname that I don't remember if it was Orson Welles, but they had given the dog who constantly licked his own rear end. Mm-hmm. And that's where that came from.
And I've also heard that like Rosebud was a horse that Mankiewicz bet on or something like that. There's lots of different interpretations of that. So again, that's another reason that I'm very excited to see Mank, to kind of find out more about all of this.
Yeah, I hope that there is no definitive truth ever. I love the urban legend.
It's like Clue. All of the different interpretations are correct, and it's just which one do you go with on any particular day?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So with Rosebud and going through this whole journey of the film, and you know, discovering that it's the name of his sled, the one that he was playing with, that we saw the day that he was sold away, basically. Yeah. You know, I think there's very obvious surface level interpretations of, like, you know, that's the day that he never, that his, you know, the tracks, he was put on the tracks that led his life down the path that it was on, right? Ended up going on. And I mean, how do you feel about that ending? Is it the thing that I think the film wants it to be initially, of like making the whole film for you and like kind of this mind-blowing twist. Is it kind of lame by today's standards? How do you feel about that?
Is it lame by today's standards? I don't know if it's lame by today's standards. I think that, like, yes, it does want you to know that in a certain sense, Rosebud is about the loss of Charles Foster Kane's youth, and that his kind of ability for self-determination was stolen from him, and tossed away. But also in a larger sense, like, the fact that nobody really notices it and that it becomes a mystery is kind of also the point of Rosebud, that like it means whatever anyone really wants it to mean, and leaves it open to interpretation, and that the conventional kind of gets tossed into the fire and you can know or not know, as it were. To me, it's like the end of Inception with the little top. You know, you can interpret that to be like that he's still living in the dream, or that like you don't know that he's still living in the dream and that everything is kind of up in the air. You know, it's kind of one of those endings that like Welles wants you to create your own interpretation, and you've gotten all of these piecemeal information from different, very slanted sources about who Charles Foster Kane was, and it's up to you as an audience member to make your own final determination, whether Rosebud was really about the sled, or about if Rosebud was about something larger, or if Rosebud was about nothing at all.
Yeah, is it one of those, like, just those things that you remember, you know? It's the story that Bernstein tells when he's being interviewed by the reporter of, you know, I saw this woman on a train track, mm-hmm. and I never talked to her, but not a day, or not a week, or not
a month.
Not a month goes by that I don't think about that girl. And that mm-hmm. was, you know, decades and decades ago. And,
right.
You know,
I mean, it does formulate all of the disdain that he has for the Thatcher character, and it drives him from the time that he's 8 or 9 to the time that he's at least in his early to mid 30s. Basically, the second inciting incident of his life, the first inciting incident being when he was taken by Thatcher, but the second inciting incident is the events at Getty's, when he basically had the love of the state ripped away from him by a political boss. And that those two events kind of formulate and shifted Charles Foster Kane's entire life in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I think my lame question just comes from like, mm-hmm. you know, I don't know. It has that feeling of, it does, like, on the surface level have that feeling of like, oh, look, it's like it was the sled all along, and like no one figured it mm-hmm. out. And in that way, like I kind of get the same feeling that I got with like the twist in a film like Shutter Island, you know,
okay,
to keep with Leonardo DiCaprio movies with and their endings.
Sure.
There's sort of a twist in that film, and it feels just kind of, that's not that great or whatever. But I think you're right that like the interpretations that come from it and all the thinking that you can do beyond that, and it's like you kind of have to go through that moment to get to the ultimate themes, which are a lot better than that single moment on the surface.
Right. And that's what I like about this twist and the twist in, say, Inception versus like the twist at the end of Sixth Sense, where it's like, this is definitive. He's been dead all along. That's why he sees the dead people. Like that, you know, that's a very one note. Here's the twist. This is the ending. This is how it goes. Versus something like Citizen Kane versus something like Inception, you know, something that has some room for flexibility to kind of play with.
Yeah, I agree. Finite endings usually then that's kind of it for that film, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I find it hard to go. I've never seen Sixth Sense, but I find it hard to want to watch that movie because I know how it ends.
Right. But I would say I knew that Rosebud was a sled well before I ever watched Citizen Kane. And it still doesn't hurt a watching of Citizen Kane to know that.
Exactly. Well, that's why this works, you know, versus I think, as you said, like finite twists for twists' sake, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without that twist taking you to a whole different level of like conceptualizing everything you've seen before and
exactly right.
Interpreting events from the film differently.
I agree.
Cool. Is there anything else you want to squeeze in about Citizen Kane? We're about to wrap this up.
No, I think I'm good. If you are still on the fence about whether you should see this film, you should absolutely see Citizen Kane. There's a reason that it's so high up on everyone's lists. It's not my favorite film of all time, but I certainly respect the hell out of this film, and it's a film that really revolutionized cinema for the better in a plethora of different ways. And it makes me even more excited to see Mank, which is hopefully a film that we'll get to talk about here again in the next month or so.
Yeah, I highly recommend the film too. In film school, when I had to watch it, a lot of the younger students than myself came out of the film saying it was really boring, which is an interpretation of it I find kind of mad because
right.
Yeah, I don't know if you hear that from somebody that's you think it's going to be, or that you think it's going to be like an old boring black and white film. I think this film just moves and is so fascinating and so well told and has such great mood and humor and drama as we've touched on. So like highly recommend it as well.
Agreed.
Cool. Well, then that does it for this episode. So thanks, Matt, for joining me to talk about Citizen Kane.
Glad to do it. Welcome. We'd love to come back anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, listener, for listening. Of course, as always, thanks Jake Wagner-Russell for doing our intro and outro music. If you want to hear more of it, you can go to soundcloud.com/bobscotch. And then also stay tuned to this channel. Our next episode is going to be a Casually Criterion episode over Diabolique. If you want to send us any questions about that film, send those to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at casualcinecast or to casualcinemedia@gmail.com. And Matt, before we go, is there anywhere that you want to direct people to keep up with you and your film reviews and anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So cinematicconsiderations.com. I will be reviewing lots of more current films, including Mank coming up here in a couple of weeks. So check those out.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks again, Matt, and see you later.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.